Hello, I'm Petra, and I'm a member of the Franciscan community of Our Lady of Compassion. And I thought it'd be quite nice to have a little think actually about compassion, and particularly about self-compassion. It's something I've been thinking about for a few weeks now and wondering quite how to approach it and what to say, but it feels to me that it's something really important, because I think for many of us, we find it really hard to be compassionate to ourselves. I think a lot of people find it really hard to accept themselves, and for whatever reason, perhaps because of things that have happened in our childhood or in our past, we find it really hard to be compassionate towards ourselves. So I just wanted to have a little think about that today. I think it comes down to the fact that a lot of us actually don't like ourselves very much. We grow up with really crooked and not very true self-images. And I think it's hard to sometimes accept ourselves and to know how much we are loved by God and by others, but especially by God. I think we carry this, I suppose it's a kind of woundedness, but this sense that we're not worthy, we're not good enough, that somehow if God really knows me, then he can't possibly love me. And it's so not true. It's so not true. But I used to feel like that. I used to feel that God couldn't possibly love me. To be honest, I didn't like myself very much for many years. I had a really poor self-image, and I really struggled to accept myself and to accept that God really loved me. And I think the wounds we carry are often, they come from our childhood. Maybe like me, you were bullied at school, and that led you to a kind of poor self-image. Or maybe it's something else. I spent years really struggling with jealousy, feeling I was never good enough and that somehow I was really jealous of other people. And I think somehow we then feel that these sins or these wounded parts of ourselves can just never be good enough and can never be accepted and can never be acceptable to God. And it's so not true. It's so not true. And it's somehow when we do come to actually accept these parts of ourselves and be able to show compassion to ourselves, it frees us up to be much more compassionate to other people and to the world around us. Because I know someone like Brendan could really go into the psychology of all this, and that would be great if he could do that. I can't do that. But all I know is that if we don't recognise what's in ourselves, we project it onto other people. So we judge other people, and they do things that we don't like, and we're critical of them. And until we actually accept that all those things are part of ourselves, we will continue to judge and criticise other people. But once we know that that is in us, that sin or that woundedness, that brokenness is in us, then when you see other people acting out, you know that they're acting from that place of brokenness. And therefore it's much easier to have compassion on that person, because you share that woundedness, you share that brokenness. And we all have these deep wounds within us, this deep, deep brokenness and poverty, this deep inner poverty and weakness. But that's not a negative. That's not a negative. It's old. I think true Christianity is so topsy-turvy to our world. It's really hard to understand. Jesus dies on the cross out of love. He becomes the most broken human person imaginable, to show us that brokenness is a way to allow God to be in our lives in a different way, in an amazing way. And actually, I think Richard Rohr writes a lot about this, but I can't quote him, but do read him. It's upside down. The whole point of Christianity and the whole point of following Jesus is to go down, to go down. It's not to try and go up to become equal with God. It's to become little, to become very, very small, to recognise our weakness, to recognise our poverty, to recognize our immense vulnerability, because when we are weak, then we are strong. And it's only when we really, really know how weak we are, how poor we are, how wounded and how broken we are, that we can allow God's light and God's love fully into our hearts. So I think once we can get our heads around that kind of topsy-turvy world and the fact that nothing is quite as it seems, we begin to actually see the revelation and the beauty in being small, in being little, in accepting that, yes, we're going to make lots of mistakes. That's part of who we are. We make mistakes. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. You know, the best thing we can do is get up and try again. Get up and try again. I still sometimes have feelings of jealousy or or anger or frustration. Not nearly as many as I used to have, but I still get those feelings. And each time I just try to bring them to God, say, I've done it again. Here I go again. And I think that self-compassion engenders a real humility, because we know how broken and wounded we are, but also a great sense of humour about ourselves. You know, we take ourselves far too seriously. And actually, we just need to lighten up a bit and realise that we are all children and we're all going to mess up and we're going to get pretty muddy, because the world is a pretty muddy place at times. But God still loves us. He loves us and loves us and loves us. And nothing will ever stop that. Nothing can come between you and the love of God. Nothing. Nothing. And it's knowing that, and really, really knowing that deep inside, not just up here, but getting it down into your heart and really knowing that God loves you in your brokenness and in your woundedness and in your most weak, vulnerable moments. God knows, God loves you, and he knows everything. And I think sometimes we pretend everything is all right, and we pretend we've got everything under control. And actually sometimes we just need to sit with God in silence and say, I've messed up. I really don't know what I'm doing. I've done it again. Here I am. I'm no better than I was 10 years ago. I'm still doing the same stuff. And just know that God loves us. And somehow, very, very gradually, over years of sitting in prayer with God and just being and allowing God to love us through those silent moments of communion, we find we are healed. Slowly, 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 we become healed. And like all good healing, it happens from the inside out. And the healing is very deep, and it will be personal to each one of us. And gradually, gradually, it makes us whole. But our life is a journey, and on this earth we're never going to be fully whole. We're never going to be fully healed. So we're always going to have some wounds and some brokenness that we're going to have to cope with. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is trying to block it out, trying to not admit to ourselves or to others how wounded and how broken we really are. And I think that's a big mistake. I think we need to sit with our brokenness and our woundedness and just sit with it and face it in prayer with God, honestly and openly, because nothing is hidden to God. He knows anyway. The only person we're really showing our brokenness is ourselves. But once we're really open to that and we allow God in, then he can transform us. And then we can begin to have this self-compassion that we so need. And then through that self-compassion, we are able to show compassion to other people. So my prayer for you today is that you spend some time with God in quiet, silent prayer. And just allow him to touch those places in your heart where you feel most broken. And we all have areas of woundedness and brokenness within. And just at some point, perhaps over the next week, if you can't do it today, just allow God to touch those broken parts in your heart, those wounded areas, and allow him to say, I love you. I love you. No matter what, I love you. Blessings.